Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the Fort Salem Library, where we read you your fanfiction. So sit down or don't, relax or don't, and enjoy these stories in a way you have not before. We at Fort Salem Library do not own Motherland Fort Salem or any of the related characters. The Motherland Fort Salem series is created by Elliot Lawrence and owned by Freeform. This story is a work of fanfiction and is meant for entertainment only. We are not making any profit from these stories. All rights of the original Motherland Fort Salem story belong to Freeform. We also do not own Small, or any of its original characters and storylines. We did, however, get permission from the author to read their story. This story was created and written by Gesshoo, and you can find the link in our show notes. This story is being read to you by Dani.
Small, Chapter 3. I cannot believe you're making us do this. Abigail, and Akashta, and Rael all occupied a long couch in a room of the children's wing that the long-retired Major Wayne had cleared for them. She provided a box of clothes she suspected would fit Tally, as well as a fresh package of underwear, then left them to try out the options. Tally, now fully awake and still somewhat sticky from her pudding despite Akashta washing her hands 3 different times. Where is it coming from? Seriously, where? Had immediately stripped off her hospital gown so that she stood in literally nothing, then promptly leapt into the box to begin her fashion show. Akashta rolled her eyes at Abigail's annoyed tone. If I have to see Tally Craven's tiny naked ass, so do you. She's your sister, so you're both going to help. A small pair of green sweatpants suddenly sailed through the air and smacked Abigail right in the face. They were still hanging off her head when she huffed at Akashta's loud laugh and said, "That is not my sister. That is a demon with too much hair." "Ugh, look at her," Rael said fondly as she watched Tally pick up item after item and dramatically pose while holding each one over the front of her body. "She's so cute." "Honestly, Ray, you're starting to freak me out. Like, is your womb hurting?" "I mean, kinda," Rael admitted with a laugh. "You're seriously telling me those baby dimples do nothing for you?" "I'm seriously telling you that, yes," Rael snorted. "So how is it going to go down when your mom starts bugging you to make tiny bellwethers?" "Making and raising are 2 very different things," Abigail told her. "The former, I'm down for. The latter, well, that's what husbands are for." "And how many are you planning on having?" Abigail quirked a brow. "Kids or husbands?" "Husbands. As many as I need," Abigail said, and Rael snorted again. "And how many do you think you need?" "1 for every kink, at least." "Goddess, please," Akashta said, shaking her head. "I do not need to know about your kinks." She tore open the small package of underwear provided, and Rael awed. "Look at those tiny baby panties," she said, and Akashta chuckled. "You really do like kids, huh, Collar?" "Yeah," Rael admitted with an easy smile. "There were a lot of orphan kids in the session, and they were always looking for someone to play with, talk to. Just give them attention or whatever. They were good kids. I had a lot of fun with them." "Who'd have thought old surly Rael Collar with her axe to grind would have a soft spot for babies?" Abigail said, pants still hanging off her head, and Rael shoved her. "Are you going to wear those pants on your head for the rest of the day?" "I'm hoping if I don't move them, she won't throw anything else at me." "Solid plan," Rael laughed. "I mean, it won't work. She clearly likes to throw things. But sure, why not?" It was true. Tally did like to throw things if the mess she made of the room in under 3 minutes was anything to go by. She also obviously had a soft spot for Abigail, despite Abigail's clear lack of one for her. At least, for this version of her. "Here, Collar." Akashta passed a small pair of panties to Rael. "Since you're the only one not even remotely weirded out by any of this, you can be the one to get her into these." "Oh, I'm definitely weirded out," Rael said, taking the underwear. "I'm just also really enjoying seeing Tally like this." "Naked?" Abigail balked, and Rael shoved her, causing the pants to fall off her head. Shut up, she said, then focused her attention on Tally, still shuffling through the box. Hey, Tal! A ball of red hair perked up. Tally's small hands pushed it out of her slightly exertion-reddened face, and she looked over at Rael. Why don't we put some underwear on, huh? Everyone braced themselves, expecting resistance. But Tally simply clambered out of the box and over to Rael. Pennies for Tally, she sing-songed brightly as Rael bent to put the underwear at Tally's small feet. Tally braced one hand on Rael's shoulder and stepped into the leg holes, then grinned the whole time Rael was shimmying the underwear up her legs. She giggled when the elastic popped into place around her belly. Now I need a bois. Anacostia chuckled, and Abigail snorted so hard she had to pinch her nose after. Ow. Nah, I think you're good, buddy, Rael said, and smoothed a hand over Tally's hair. No bra needed. Tally's brows shot up, and she cupped her hands over her non-existent breast. No bra? Nope, Rael said. No bra. Tally pursed her lips and mumbled, if you say so, then bounced back to her box of clothes as the three women on the couch laughed. I hope she remembers this when she's her again, Rael said, and Abigail nodded. That might actually make this worth enduring. Costa! Anacostia looked at Tally, now standing in the box again with a painfully bright orange T-shirt held over her chest. Yes, you like that one? My Sarah likes orange? Chuckling, Anacostia crossed to the box and dropped down to her knees. It's a little bright for the general, she said. I mean, for your Sarah. And Tally smiled so wide that her cheeks pitted. Oh, goddess, these dimples. I like white. I'm sure you do, sweet girl, Anacostia said and poked the tip of her index finger into one of Tally's dimples. Bright like this beautiful smile of yours. Somehow, Tally's smile widened. Her dimples sank further. She was all grin and hair, and Anacostia sighed, shaking her head. She pulled a soft blue T-shirt from the box instead, one that had a small pink heart in its center, and asked, How about this one? Blue like my Sarah's eyes, Tally said, and dropped the orange shirt to clutch onto the blue. My Sarah's eyes are so... So? Rael snickered. Just so? So what, Tal? So the best, Tally said with a dreamy, dramatic sigh, and Rael laughed harder. All right, Anacostia said as she helped Tally tug on the shirt. Let's pick out some pants to cover this little butt of yours, and then we can find some shoes. Boots, Tally said as her head popped out of the collar of the T-shirt. I want my army boots. They'll be too big for you now, Anacostia said as she shimmied some baggy little jeans up and over Tally's bottom. But maybe we can find some other boots to wear. Tally's precious smile collapsed into a frown. No army boots? Nope. Tally's precious smile collapsed into a frown. No army boots? We can find something better, Anacostia promised, but Tally's frown refused to budge. It deepened in the span of a breath, and suddenly she was glaring. Oh shit, Rael said, and Abigail was already on her feet, heading for the door. Hell no, she was saying, but Rael had already panicked and crossed to Tally in a ridiculous, stumbling run. Look, Tal, she said, and immediately started yanking off her own boots. You can wear my army boots. Yeah, here we go. See? Soldier boots for Tally. Too big, Way, Tally said, but stepped into the boots anyway, and suddenly she was giggling again. She clomped across the room seriously and held her hand out to Abigail, who still hovered by the now open door, ready to make a break for it. Aggie, come! Abigail narrowed her eyes. Come where? To Tally. Abigail's nose scrunched, and she looked at Rael. Wouldn't you rather hold Rael's hand? No, Tally waved her hand impatiently. Okay, rude, Rael muttered, and crossed her arms over her chest. Aggie, come to Tally. Abigail huffed, almost as dramatic as the child she'd been attempting to avoid, then stuck her hand out so Tally could take it. There, she said as Tally curled their fingers together. Happy? Yes. Tally swung their hands around happily, then turned and clomped back towards the couch. yanking Abigail along behind her. She was halfway back when she stumbled over the boots, swamping her small feet, and down, down she went, and down went Abigail after. Abigail staggered roughly to one knee and just barely managed to catch herself on the couch to keep from falling completely. They each watched in horror, however, as Tally barreled all the way down and met the floor, her forehead smacking loudly against the tile. A second later, a sharp cry rent the air. Sarah wrenched awake as a cry rang in her ears and pain shot across her face and through her head. The soul bond knotted in her chest, curling furiously, and she jolted up on her bed. Her hand rocked up to her face, clutching her forehead, and Sarah cried out through far speech, "Anacostia, what's happened?" "She's fine!" Anacosstia's reply was swift. "She's fine." "Then why do I feel like someone has just punched me in the face?" She groaned and kneaded her forehead and temples with her fingertips. She needed to move, needed to get dressed, get to Tally. She threw back her quilt and stood at the same time Anacostia's voice came crackling back through. "She tripped over her own feet and hit her head," she said, "but she's fine." "She hit her head?" Sarah was already halfway dressed, panic pinging in her chest now. "Are you certain she isn't concussed? I can feel her pain." "Collars checking her now. I'm coming." "General, she's fine," Anacostia said, but Sarah couldn't stop rubbing her forehead, couldn't stop pressing her fingers over her heart. "She's fine. I promise. I should be with her." "Sarah," Anacostia replied, exasperated, "all kids trip and fall. She's fine. You don't need to come running. Look, she's already stopped crying." Sarah closed her eyes and waited. A second later, the image Anacostia projected filtered into her mind, a bit warped by her movements, but clear enough. She was sitting on the floor with Tally in her lap, looking down at Tally's tear-slicked cheeks from above as she gently rocked the girl from side to side. Raelle sat in front of them, her hand wrapped around one of Tally's and her eyes closed. Tally was sniffling, but not openly crying, and as Sarah watched the image, the tension in her chest began to ease. She breathed a sigh of relief and opened her eyes, calmed enough to drop back down to the edge of her bed. She wiped a hand over her tired face and collapsed back onto the mattress. "Please update me if there are any changes," she said, and fought the urge still singing in her soul to get up and go. Go to Tally. Hold her close and keep her safe. Safe from the world. Safe from harm. Safe from her own stumbling feet, apparently. "And Anacostia?" "Yes, General?" "Please tell Tally." Sarah hesitated. She wasn't usually this open, certainly not over such modes of communication, but she couldn't shake the feeling in her chest, the need gnawing at her, needing Tally, needing to comfort her, envelop her. "Tell her I—" A lovely, deep laugh sang in Sarah's ears, saving her from having to finish. "Tell her yourself, Mother," came the reply. Sarah sighed and reached out to her tiny soulmate via far speech. She knew Tally wouldn't be able to vocalize the seed to reply, as she hadn't even learned it yet prior to being biddied, but she wanted the girl to hear her voice. She hoped it would soothe Tally in much the way Tally's voice had always soothed Sarah. Her palm was still massaging the space over her heart when she murmured the words, "Tally, my love?" "All good, buddy," Raelle said with a small smile. She squeezed Tally's knee. "Just a little bruise." Tally frowned and reached up, jabbed a finger into her forehead. "Ow!" Raelle chuckled. "Well, don't poke it." "My face is woke," Tally said, and Raelle's smile widened. Her laugh rasped and deepened. "It's not funny, Whale." "Aw, Tal." Raelle squeezed one of Tally's small bare feet. The two large boots now kicked onto the floor beside her. "I promise your face isn't broken. It's just a little sore." "But my—" The words choked in Tally's throat, and her tear-sheened eyes were syrupy as they blew wider than seemed possible. She jerked up in Anacostia's lap, and her pouting lips dropped open. "My Stella!" "What the hell?" Abigail muttered from behind Raelle, and they both turned swiftly towards the door, half expecting to see the General standing there. Anacostia chuckled and bounced Tally a bit in her lap. "It's far speech." Tally's fingers touched excitedly at her ears as she might find Sarah inside them somehow and pull her out. My Sarah? I don't think she can hear you, Tal, Rael said and squeezed Tally's foot again. She probably just wants to say hello. But Tally wasn't listening. Not to Rael. Her eyes were the size of saucers, and her fingers refused to budge from her ears. She pulled and pulled at her earlobes as if she could unlock some hidden hatch and find a secret pathway to her Sarah. Sarah, I broke my face, she shouted, and Rael cringed. She didn't know what the general was saying to Tally, but she was suddenly very glad it was a one-way connection. And I got panties! Abigail groaned. We are actually listening to Tally tell General Alder about her panties, she said, and Rael cackled. She rested her back against Abigail's knees as Abigail dipped her forehead down and ground it into Rael's shoulders. Please just wind strike me out of my misery. If it helps, Rael said, the general can't actually hear her talking about her panties, so it doesn't help at all. Normally I would agree with you, Bellwether, but they're also 5-year-olds' panties, Anacostia said. So get your miserable head out of the gutter. She was mid-belly laugh when Tally suddenly rocketed off her lap, faster than could even be realized. Her shoulder whacked into Anacostia's face in the process, the woman letting out a grunt and howl, and then Tally was out the door like a cheetah on the hunt. Oh shit, Rael said, and was on her socked feet in an instant. Go, Abs, stop her! She frantically started yanking her boots on while Abigail took her precious time getting up. Anacostia, you good? I'm good, Anacostia groaned, fingers testing the bridge of her nose. I'm good. Go. Abs! I'm going, Abigail growled, then stomped towards the hall. Fucking kids. When Abigail rounded into the hall, she caught instant sight of the energized red hairball that was her sister. The girl was posted at the end of the long hallway, tugging viciously and uselessly at the sector door. It was thick and metal and required a special key to unlock. All the sector doors in the children's wing were designed that way. It prevented the kids from wandering out onto base unsupervised. The last thing they needed was an adventurous child finding their way into the middle of weather training and getting swept up into a tornado or pummeled by a hailstorm. Tally, Abigail barked, and Tally whirled around with a squeak. Get back over here. No, Tally shouted. I need to see my Sarah. Abigail crossed her arms over her chest and leaned her shoulder against the wall. Well, you're not going by yourself, so you might as well stop trying. No! And then Tally was on the move again, disappearing into the room nearest her as Anacostia and Rael joined Abigail in the hall. Where did she go? Rael asked, a little breathless. Abs, you were supposed to get her. Abigail rolled her eyes again, harder. It's not like she can really go anywhere. She's stuck on this floor. Yeah, except she nearly shook the lights out of the infirmary ceiling earlier, Rael said. So how do you know she can't get out somehow? Because I just watched her tugging on the door like a dog with a rope, Abigail droned. It didn't go anywhere, and neither will she. You better pray to the goddess you're right, Anacostia said, already moving down the hall. Because if we don't find this child, I'm writing you both up. Abigail balked. What did we do? What haven't you done? Honestly, Abs, I don't think you have to worry about it, Rael said. If we don't find her, we won't be alive enough to get written up. Meaning? Meaning, if we lose Tally, the general will probably have us drawn and quartered, Rael said, and the genuine concern riddling her features was enough to stoke the flame of doubt in Abigail's gut. Or at least strung up like rag dolls for all of Fort Salem to see. Oh, Abigail said, eyes widening by the second. In the span of a breath, she became the most alert of the three, shooting past Anacostia towards the room at the end of the hall as if someone had just lit her pants on fire, and the only water in the world was hidden behind that door. Tiny Tally Craven, you get your microscopic ass out here right now! One by one, 3 heads popped around the doorframe of a large children's bedroom. Anacostia, Rael, and Abigail each peered into the dark room, clocking the shadows of 3 sets of bunk beds, several short dressers, and various other children's things, toys, clothes, what little belongings the orphaned kids who slept in that room had garnered over their time there. The room was currently empty, but for the small, missing gremlin they knew had to be lurking in the shadows somewhere. And when they heard a delighted little giggle, Anacostia narrowed her eyes. "Left side," she murmured quietly. "Far corner." Like the smooth flow of water, the three women slipped into the room, closing the door behind them, and split. They trailed silently, each approaching from a different angle, slinking cautiously towards the direction of the giggle, still giggling. The far corner of the left side of the room was tucked behind one of the bunk beds and just to the side of a small rack of hanging clothes. As Anacostia rounded the end of the bunk, she could just make out the shuddering shadow of a small girl clamping a hand over her mouth to keep quiet. She held up a fist to stop Rael and Abigail's approach. "Tally," she said gently, but the second the name escaped her lips, the tiny shadow shrieked and bolted. Anacostia lunged, but Tally quickly dodged her, jumping through the hanging clothes and out. Her small giggle turned into a horrifying disembodied cackle, echoing around the room as she shot through and around obstacles with ease. Her top-heavy shadow, long hair flying, swept past each of them with an impressive speed only an excited, mischievous child could muster, wriggling behind dressers and under bunk beds, just out of reach. "She's fast," Rael said, trying and failing to grab the fleeing munchkin before her shadow disappeared again, and then, all at once, the thundering of little feet ceased entirely. In the silence, everyone froze. Rael's brow shot toward her hairline. Anyone got eyes on her? "Tally?" Anacostia called again. When the girl didn't answer, not even to giggle, she huffed. "All right, enough games. Collar, get the light." Rael jogged back over and smacked the switch beside the door, winced when the room flickered and flooded with light a second later. "Eyes?" she called as she blinked her own rapidly to adjust. "Not yet," Anacostia answered, also blinking as she squinted around the room. "What the hell?" Rael groaned. "Where did she go?" Suddenly, Abigail squeaked and stiffened. Her face stretched into a horrified expression, eyes wide, lips curling down. "Guys," she whispered, voice strained and terrified. "I think I found her." "Where?" Slowly, Abigail turned, and there, perched on her back like a demonic little chimp attached to a tree, was Tally, gripping Abigail's jacket and flashing the most wicked little grin Rael had ever seen. "Abby," she growled, then freed another tiny giggle, and Abigail whimpered pitifully. And then, all at once, the room erupted with the sounds of laughter. Anacostia roared with it, holding her stomach while Rael collapsed onto the nearest bottom bunk, wheezing. "Get it off me," Abigail whined, shaking her hands in the air as if she just touched something gross. Between whistling breaths, Rael said, "Don't call her an it, Abs." Abigail grumbled and whined again. "Just shut up and help me, shitbird." Still laughing, Rael stumbled over and tucked her hands under Tally's arms. "Come on, Tal. Let's give Aggie's back a break." Tally giggled and let herself be pulled away, turning to wrap her legs around Rael's waist and said, "Way, take me to my sewa." "Okay," Rael said, grinning at the girl. She proudly held up a hand. "Good job scaring Aggie, Tal. Gimme 5." Tally slapped her hand in a high five and squealed with delight. "To sewa!" she shouted and bounced on Rael's hip. "Okay, whoa there," she chuckled. "You're small, but you're not that small." "No, you're not just very big," Anacostia said as she walked over, wiping tears from her cheeks. She stroked a hand over Tally's wild hair. "You are clearly a little terror-craven, but that was definitely worth it. I seriously hate you both." "So grumpy," Tally said, smushing her face into a ridiculous, mocking pout. "Grumpy Aggie needs pudding." "All right," Abigail huffed. "That's enough." Tally's eyes widened. "Aggie?" she said softly, eyes beginning to water. "Mad at Tally?" "Uh-uh," Abigail said. "Don't even try those tears on me. Rael, put her down." Rael frowned, but did as she was told. What are you going to do? What we should have done hours ago. The second Tally's bare feet hit the floor, Abigail stood rigidly and stared severely down at her. Private Craven, she said sharply, voice commanding and militant. At attention! Rael snorted. Yeah, But before she could get the words out, Tally's small little body snapped right to attention as if on autopilot. Her eyes were still wide, still watering, but her spine was straight, and her tiny hands slapped right down to her sides. Her wild hair hung in her face, but she made no attempt to shove it away. Rael's gaze shot to Anacostia over Tally's head and found her equally shocked. Well, I'll be damned, Anacostia murmured, and Rael nodded. Abigail cleared her throat, still the picture perfect of a bellwether at command, and said, Private Craven, my name is Abigail. Repeat. Agabail, Tally said promptly, and Rael had to choke back a laugh. Abigail. Tally's face scrunched, her mouth moved wordlessly. Then, Agabail. Abigail rolled her eyes, but accepted that the name was not going to exit the girl's mouth correctly. Close enough, she said, then straightened again, tilting her chin up. Now, Private Craven, you will walk quietly and respectfully with Sergeant Quartermain to the administration building, where you will report to General Alder for further command. Tally's small brows perked up. Myself? General Alder. Yes, Abigail said. Is that understood, Private? Tally chewed her bottom lip. Her fingers played with the denim material of her pants legs as she bounced on her feet for a second, but remained mostly in place. Rael was certain that she was going to bolt again, but after another few seconds, the girl blew out a dramatic breath and said, Yes. Yes, what? Yes, Aggie. Abigail. Tally's head dipped, and she muttered, Yes, Abigail. Good soldier, Abigail said with a firm nod, and that seemed to cheer Tally a bit. She brightened, looking up at Abigail as if her praise was the only thing in the world that mattered in that moment, and a slow smile stretched over her lips. Her dimples became prominent in the bright fluorescent light, and even Abigail softened a bit. Now, take Sergeant Quartermain's hand and do as instructed, please. Tally's hand immediately shot up, open and waiting, and Anacostia quickly wrapped her own around it. Well done, Bellwether, she chuckled and steered Tally towards the door. Yeah, Abs, Rael said, slinging her arm around Abigail's shoulders. That was impressive. This is a military base, Abigail huffed as she and Rael followed Anacostia back into the hall. I did not say the words to become a glorified babysitter, not even for one of my sisters. The sun had already dipped beneath the horizon when Sarah returned to her office. She'd barely rested, her mind too unsettled from the day's events. The weeks, if she were being honest. But what little she'd gotten was better than no rest at all. The biddies had beaten her there, already an hour into their tasking by the time Sarah dropped heavily into her chair. How are you all feeling? She asked, and the women each only hummed or grumbled in response. Sarah chuckled. Clearly still tired, then. Exhausted, Yarrow said, voice raspy, and my knees hurt. Again with your knees, Sarah said, and rolled her eyes. She wiped a hand down her face, then stretched her arms up over her head. Her uniform jacket strained around her shoulders, then settled back into place as she relaxed. Should I place an order for more Bengay? Yarrow glared at her. Bengay is for old people. Yes, and? A sharp knock on the door interrupted them, and Sarah's head shot up. Enter, she called, and the door quickly opened to reveal Anacostia with a small, fully dressed Tally attached to her hand. Well, fully dressed but for her feet, which were bare and tucked into a pair of somewhat dirty bunny slippers. Sarah's heart instantly melted at the sight, and she was on her feet in seconds. Why, Sarah! Tally shouted, clearly excited, and started to yank her hand free. But the pointed clearing of Anacostia's throat stopped her cold. She looked up at her sergeant and nodded gravely. So Anacostia slowly released her. With perfect form, Tally clasped her hands behind her back and walked stiffly into the office, meeting Sarah in the middle of the room. She licked her lips and looked up at her soulmate. General Aldu, she said seriously, and Sarah had to mentally hush the biddies, their awing like soft thunder in her head. She couldn't help her smile, though, stretching her lips until she was looking down at her small girl with a rare toothy grin. Quivit quaving we pudding. Sarah did her best to summon her general persona despite the warm rush of affection crashing through her body like a tidal wave. She straightened her posture and clasped her own hands firmly at the base of her spine. Excellent form, Private, she said. Now, at ease. With a delighted giggle, Tally lunged and leapt at her, and Sarah bent easily to scoop her up. The second Tally was in her arms, her small hands were on Sarah's cheeks. She lay her forehead against Sarah's and closed her eyes, and Sarah did the same. My Sarah, she whispered, and Sarah sighed. My Tally, she whispered back, stroking her fingers over the girl's hair. They stayed like that for a moment, just holding each other, and Sarah leaned into the feeling, letting herself be soothed by her soulmate, even as she was. Then she slowly retreated, just enough to stroke the backs of her knuckles down Tally's puffy cheek. Are you all right, my love? How is your head? Tally reached up and poked her forehead, right over the slightly darkened spot above her eyebrow. Ow, she said and frowned. I got a bruise. I see that, Sarah said, gently rubbing her thumb over the spot. Let's not poke it, okay? Kisses? Tally asked, bending her forehead toward Sarah's lips. With a soft laugh, Sarah pressed a kiss to Tally's bruise. How's that? She asked, and Tally smiled sweetly at her. Better. Good. Sarah swayed from foot to foot, rocking her as she turned to face Anacostia. Good day? It was fine, Anacostia said, and Sarah could tell she was holding back but didn't press. Some things, she was sure, she didn't need to know. She wouldn't wear shoes that weren't army boots, so we compromised. Ah, I see. Sarah chuckled and pinched one of Tally's feet through her bunny slipper. Tally giggled and buried her face in Sarah's neck. I got panties too, Sarah. Lisha, seated at the chess table, snorted out a loud laugh, and Sarah couldn't help but echo it. And when Tally patted one small hand over her chest and proudly announced, and no bra, because I'm only 5 and I got no boobies. Everyone in the room collectively lost it. Hey, some of us are fully grown and have no boobies, Lisha teased and tossed a pointed look Kate's way. Eh, Katie girl? Kate's quick response was to flip her the bird, which only made everyone laugh harder. Sarah, I need noodles now, okay? Noodles? Tally nodded emphatically. With spaghetti sauce. Spaghetti? Ember groaned and buried her face in her hands. Help me! It's too cute! I'm getting baby fever. Well, good luck with that, Lisha said. Your uterus probably has cobwebs in it. Sarah chuckled and rubbed her hands smoothly up and down Tally's back. Spaghetti is doable, my love, but you must have a bath after. Deal? Deal! Tally squealed excitedly. With bubbles! Well, of course, Sarah said, still unable to tame her grin. Goddess, she had one hell of a week, and she couldn't recall the last time she'd been more eager to plant her body in her bed and stay there. But Tally's bright optimism and smile could pull the shadows away from any room, the weight from any spine. At 5 years old, 20, 80. It didn't matter. Tally Craven was Sarah Alder's comfort, her joy, her home. A good bath must always have bubbles. Sarah nodded to Anacostia. Thank you for today, daughter. You are a blessing. Anacostia's smile was soft, loving. Of course, mother. Would you like me to check back in tomorrow? Isadora needs us in the lab, Sarah said on a sigh. She wants to manually check the structure of the biddy link to see if anything's changed. Could you meet us there? Of course. Thank you, Sarah said. I'm not sure how the morning will go with this one, so I will notify you when we are headed over. Ma'am, Anacostia said. Then with another nod, she was out the door, leaving Sarah to her precious collective of women and her one wee girl. Sarah? Tally whispered in the following silence, and Sarah pressed their foreheads together again. Yes, my love?
I need to pee.
As the biddies all burst into laughter again, Sarah shook her head and carried Tally through to the restroom. The door was swinging closed behind them when Tally's happy cry echoed out and free. "The noodles!"
Please find the fanfiction you just listened to on Archive of Our Own, and leave the author some love. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and we want to thank them from the bottoms of our hearts for creating these amazing stories and keeping the show alive.